Have you ever had a neighbor who acted like your home was theirs? Reginald Carter, or Reggie as everyone warmly called him, was the kind of person you might overlook at a party, but remember long after you've had a conversation with him. He was incredibly patient, the kind of man who could quiet a noisy group of middle schoolers with just a glance. He wasn't flashy, he wasn't loud, and he didn't seek attention. That was exactly how he preferred to live. Reggie taught science at a middle school in Lakeland, Florida, a place where most students cared more about TikTok than the periodic table. But that didn't bother him. In fact, he saw it as an interesting challenge. Every day he tried to turn dry information into something relatable, making kids widen their eyes in wonder when they saw that water could actually evaporate right off their hands. He lived a life so steady and orderly you could set your watch by the sound of his footsteps coming home. Every afternoon, Reggie returned to his one-story red brick house on the corner. It wasn't big or fancy, but it was as tidy as he was. The lawn was trimmed in straight, even lines. The small hedges were neatly shaped. His driveway was always clean, just enough space for his old but dependable sedan. That house was his sanctuary. It was where he graded papers under the soft glow of a warm lamp, sipped coffee and watched baseball. It was where he found calm in an increasingly chaotic world. But then that peace was disrupted, not by noise, and not by some mischievous student. It was disrupted by Blythe Vanderholt. She lived right next door, with a frosty smile and a gleaming silver Lexus RX. She came into his life as a reminder that even the calmest places can be thrown into disorder by just one person. At first, it was just a small incident. One day when Reggie got home from school, he found her Lexus parked right across his driveway. He was surprised but not upset. Maybe she had guests or needed to rearrange her car. Everyone does that once in a while. But it didn't stop there. The next day, it was the same Lexus. A few days later, it happened again. No apology, not even a quick note, just brief excuses whenever he happened to run into her. Just stopping by for a second. Dropping something off, needed space for the driver to turn around. And always that strained smile, that casual wave, as if Reggie should be thankful that she was only borrowing a bit of his space. And Reggie? He stayed quiet, polite, because he wasn't the type to make trouble. He believed in kindness, believed that if you reminded someone gently, they would understand and stop. But some people only stop when you make them stop. One day, Reggie realized that if he did not act, no one else would do it for him. That day, after a long day of standing in front of students glued to their phones and unfinished tests waiting to be graded, Reggie wanted just one thing. He wanted to go home, sink into his worn-out sofa, turn on the TV, and let a few peaceful moments ease his fatigue. But no. The silver Lexus RX was parked right in the middle of his driveway again, as if it were a newly installed piece of furniture in his yard. There was no one around, no note, no sign asking for permission. Reggie stood there for a few seconds, staring at the car, his jaw clenched. Then he took a deep breath and exhaled slowly. Stay calm, he told himself. Be patient, like he always had been. He walked up and knocked on Blythe's door. Knock, knock, knock. The door opened slowly. Just as he had predicted, there was no trace of surprise in Blythe's eyes. On the contrary, she looked at him as if she had already anticipated this moment. "Oh, Reggie," she said, stretching out his name like she was greeting an old friend she had not seen in years. Her voice was so sweet it made your skin crawl. "What's going on?" He kept his voice calm, although every muscle in his face had started to tighten. "Your car is in my driveway again?" And he tilted her head, pretending to be surprised. A faint smile appeared on her lips. "Oh, I was just picking up a delivery. The driver needed room to turn around. You don't mind, do you?" Reggie spoke slowly, carefully articulating each word. "Yes, I do mind. I need you to stop." The atmosphere changed. Blythe's smile faded. She let out a sigh, as if she were dealing with something far more important than this. "I live right next door, Reggie. It's not like I'm parking in a stranger's yard." "But this is my property," he replied, his voice now firmer. Blythe pouted, gave a dry laugh, and muttered softly, "Oh, please, it's just a few minutes. You're making a big deal out of nothing." Have you ever been in a situation like that, when someone crosses a clear boundary and then turns around to blame you for not quietly accepting it? Though reluctant, Blythe did move her car that day. But the look in her eyes as she turned the wheel made one thing clear. This was not over. And it truly was not. In the days that followed, Reggie found himself caught in a game he never wanted to play. A game of patience. Some days he came home to see the Lexus sitting there again. Some days he left a note. It was simple and polite. Other days he knocked on her door, but it seemed Blythe had a gift for disappearing at the perfect moment. She never answered. One time, he tried waiting outside in his yard. The lights in her house were still on, the sound of the TV still playing, but the door? No one responded. Over time, his frustration turned into fatigue. And then one night, something finally broke. Reggie had just returned from a stressful parent-teacher meeting. All he wanted was a simple dinner and a few moments of peace. But as soon as he turned onto his street, he came to a stop. The silver Lexus was still there. And this time it was not alone. A shiny black BMW, clearly not a car from Reggie's household, was parked perfectly across the entrance to his garage. This was no longer a small inconvenience. It was a blatant act of disregard. He could not believe what he was seeing. Someone had openly turned his driveway into their own private parking lot. Inside Reggie, something went quiet. There was no more anger, no confusion, only certainty. This was not a misunderstanding. This was disrespect. He had had enough. Reggie parked on the street, took out his phone and snapped a few pictures. Then he walked straight to Blythe's door and knocked. Harder this time. The door opened slowly. Her face was filled with irritation, as if he was the one causing the problem. "Reggie," she said, her tone weary. "Whose car is that?" Reggie asked. His gaze was sharp, and his hand pointed directly at his blocked driveway. Blythe shrugged. Her voice was light, as if she were commenting on the weather. "Ah, that's my friends. We're just having a little get-together. You weren't home, so I thought it wouldn't be a problem." Not a problem. To Reggie, those words felt like a slap in the face. "It is a big deal," he replied through clenched teeth. "This is not a public parking lot. This is my home." But instead of apologizing, Blythe crossed her arms and tilted her head, as if he was the one being unreasonable. "If it bothered you, you should have said something earlier. I would have moved the car." Reggie took a deep breath to stay calm. "I am saying it now. Please move the car." Blythe rolled her eyes in annoyance, then turned and walked into the house as if she were doing him a favor. Reggie waited. 10 minutes, then 15. When the clock hit 20, he knew he had waited long enough. He went back into his house, dropped onto the couch, and pulled out his phone. That was it. He started looking up the number for a local towing company. But that was only the beginning. Does this feel familiar to you? When you try to be kind and others take it as a sign of weakness? Reggie was a private man who avoided conflict and always gave others the benefit of the doubt. But Blythe Vanderholt had crossed the line. The next morning, before heading to work, he called the neighborhood's homeowners association. He did not expect much, knowing Blythe had influence within the board. As expected, a disinterested female voice answered, "Unless there's physical damage to your property, we don't get involved in neighbor disputes. Have you tried talking to her?" Reggie let out a sigh. "I've been talking to her. We can send a courtesy email as a reminder if you'd like." "A courtesy email? Really?" Reggie pictured Blythe laughing as she read it, then going right back to doing whatever she wanted. But he had no time to argue with the system. He thanked them and hung up. If the HOA would not step in, he would handle it himself. That morning he left one final note on the windshield of the Lexus RX. The words were printed in large, bold letters. "Do not park here again." But when Reggie came home that evening, the note was gone, and the Lexus still there. This time it was parked crooked, carelessly, almost like a challenge. He stood frozen, eyes locked on the scene in front of him. There was no doubt left in his mind. Blythe was not sorry. She was doing this on purpose. What would you do if you were in Reggie's shoes? Would you keep being patient? Or would you finally stand up and fight? Reggie stepped onto Blythe's porch and knocked on the door with such force that the sound echoed through the neighborhood. 1 minute passed, then 2. Finally the doors swung open, and there was Blythe, holding a glass of wine, her expression indifferent, as if he were ruining her perfect relaxing evening. "Reggie," she said, dragging out his name like a complaint. "I need you to move your car now," he said. His voice was firm, though he was trying to stay calm. Blythe took a sip of wine and exhaled gently, like she was speaking to a bothersome child. "Oh, I almost texted you, but then I thought you always park on the street anyway, so it probably wouldn't bother you." Have you ever met someone like that? Someone who makes up their own rules for others while standing on your property? Reggie clenched his fists at his sides, trying to stay composed. "It does bother me. This is my property, Blythe." She laughed. It was a short, sharp sound like a knife. "Reggie, come on, are you really making a scene over a parking spot?" He stepped forward, his eyes lit with anger. "I'm furious because I've told you so many times, and you keep ignoring me." Blythe swirled her wineglass as if watching a bad play, then sighed. Fine. I'll move it." Reggie turned away, trying to push the rage down, but then she muttered something. It was quiet, too low to catch clearly, but just loud enough to stop him in his tracks. "What did you say?" he asked, turning back. Blythe shrugged, her eyes wide with fake innocence. "Nothing." "No. You said something," he repeated, his voice cold. She smirked, just wondering why some people get so overly sensitive about such small things. That was it, the final spark that lit the fire. Her attitude. That smugness, the quiet arrogance, that way of acting like she was always right. He didn't say another word. He walked back to his house, pulled out his phone, and saved the number of the towing company. That night, as he sat grading papers, her voice still echoed in his head. Her look, her disregard. And he knew she wasn't going to stop. Next time, Reggie would not knock. He would not leave a note. He would not issue a warning. He called the tow truck. It was a Friday evening. A long, exhausting week had just ended, and when he came home, the first thing he saw was the Lexus RX parked squarely across his driveway. Again. But this time, instead of getting angry, he stayed calm. Maybe because he knew this was the moment to strike back. He parked at the end of the street, pulled out his phone, and made the call. "I need this car towed, immediately." In less than 20 minutes, the tow truck arrived. Everything unfolded like a scene that had been rehearsed. The driver stepped out, looked at the situation, and nodded. This car is blocking your driveway? That's right, Reggie said, handing over the property ownership document. He had come fully prepared. All right, buddy, let's hook it up. Within minutes, the luxury SUV was lifted off the ground, its wheels locked in place, then slowly disappeared down the street. Reggie stood with his arms crossed, watching it go, a wave of satisfaction rising in his chest. It was not exactly victory, it was justice. But he had no idea what was coming next. Would Blythe explode in rage, call the police, pretend she didn't know anything? He didn't have to wait long. About an hour later, just as Reggie sat down to rest, came the sound. Bam, 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 fists pounding the door with enough force to break it. Blythe. This time, Reggie did not rush. He got up slowly. It was time to end this. He stretched lazily as if waking from a good nap and let her wait. When he opened the door, she stood there in flip-flops and ivory silk pajamas, her face flushed red with fury, her perfectly cut blonde bob now wild with anger. In her hand, her phone was clenched tightly, as if it were somehow to blame. "Where is my car?" she hissed, as if he had committed a crime. Reggie tilted his head, his calm expression only fueling her rage. "You mean the car that was parked illegally in my driveway?" Blythe breathed hard, her nostrils flaring. "Don't play games with me, Reggie. Where's my car?" "It got towed," he said with the same tone someone might use to mention it was starting to rain. Her mouth dropped open. She looked stunned, like she couldn't believe what she had just heard. "You did what?" "You heard me clearly," Reggie said, looking her straight in the eyes. "You refused to stop taking over my space, so I had to act. Simple as that." Blythe burst into laughter. It was sharp, wild, and cold. "You're going to pay for this. Do you even know who I am? I'm on the HOA board. I have connections, Reggie." Reggie blinked slowly. "Good for you. Your car is at Sunshine Towing on Orange Blossom Road. Sleep well." And with a polite nod, he shut the door firmly. But Blythe wasn't done. She stood at his front door for 10 full minutes, shouting threats and hurling veiled warnings. Then, as her final move, she called the police. When the officers arrived, Reggie opened the door with the property ownership papers already in hand. "You had her car towed from your driveway?" one officer asked. "Yes," Reggie answered plainly, and handed over the documents. The officer glanced through them, then turned to Blythe. "Ma'am, he had every right to do that. If you want your car back, you'll need to pay the impound fee." The moment Blythe's face turned bright red with frustration, Reggie almost considered printing that image and framing it on his wall. But he knew it wasn't over, and he was right. You think she stopped after that? Not a chance. Blythe launched a campaign of petty, calculated retaliation. It started with passive-aggressive notes. One was taped to Reggie's door in bold red marker, written like a legal warning. "This is a community. We should care about each other." Reggie glanced at it, smirked, and tossed it straight into the trash. Then came the HOA complaints, which Reggie couldn't help but laugh at. The first letter claimed the fern on his front porch did not match the community aesthetic, even though it had been there for over 2 years. The next one complained that he left his trash bin out too long. The third one criticized the fading paint on his mailbox. By the time he received the fourth letter, Reggie wasn't angry anymore. He was almost impressed. She was truly putting in the time and effort. But the real peak of her antics came when she started calling neighborhood security. One evening, while Reggie was watering the lawn in his front yard, a white SUV from the neighborhood security team pulled up to the curb, its lights flashing. A tall, middle-aged officer stepped out, adjusted his belt, and wore a serious expression. You can probably guess what came next. The officer got out of the vehicle, moving like he was about to handle a serious incident. "Do you live here, sir?" he asked, his eyes scanning Reggie closely. Reggie frowned. "Yeah. Is there a problem?" The officer cleared his throat, sounding a bit hesitant. "We received a call about some suspicious activity." Suspicious. That word again. Reggie sighed and turned his head across the street. As expected, Blythe Vanderholt was standing on her porch, arms crossed, face blank as if she had no idea what was happening. Reggie looked back at the officer with a dry smile. "So, watering my lawn is now considered suspicious?" The officer scratched his head, clearly uncomfortable. I'm just following procedure, sir." "Forget it," Reggie interrupted. "I already know who called. Tell her to find something useful to do." The officer gave a quiet nod and returned to his vehicle. Blythe smiled. It was a smug, victorious smile, as if she had just scored a point in a vicious tennis match. But Reggie didn't let it go. He walked straight across his yard and onto her porch. "Blythe," he called. She blinked, feigning innocence. "Oh, what is it, Reggie? I saw security come by. I do hope everything's all right." He crossed his arms. "You know exactly why they showed up." She put on a look of mock surprise. "Reggie, there's no need to be rude. I'm simply concerned about the safety of our neighborhood. We all have a responsibility, don't we?" Reggie stared at her. She wanted a reaction. She wanted him to lose his temper so she could report him, escalate the issue, play the victim. But he didn't take the bait. Instead, he smiled. It was a calm, warning kind of smile. "I'm done playing, Blythe," he said, his voice low and steady. "I've given you more chances than you deserve, but you keep pushing. Now you're going to see what happens when I start pushing back." For the first time, Blythe's eyes showed a flicker of confusion, and she had every reason to be worried. 1 week later, it was Saturday afternoon. Reggie returned from the gym, feeling relaxed and humming a tune. But as he turned onto his familiar street, he came to a sudden stop. Blythe's Lexus RX was parked squarely in his driveway again. This time, it was completely blocking the garage, bold and unapologetic. Even worse, Reggie's family was on their way over for a backyard barbecue he was hosting. He sat in his car for a few seconds, staring directly at Blythe's masterpiece, then sighed and pulled out his phone. "Hello, this is Reggie Carter," he said, his tone calm as still water. "Need a car towed. Same location as last time." The dispatcher chuckled. "Let me guess. Same car?" "Spot on. We'll be there in 15 minutes. Reggie smiled. This time the lesson would leave a mark. He popped the trunk, took out a folding chair and settled on his front porch, arms crossed, looking as relaxed as if he were watching a good movie. The tow truck arrived right on time. The driver hopped out, adjusting his gloves, eyes gleaming with anticipation. "This again?" "Looks like she hasn't learned her lesson," Reggie said, pointing at the Lexus. "Some people never do," the driver replied, then got to work attaching the cables. It only took a few minutes, no hesitation, no interruption. This time it was not just an action, it was a statement. The tow truck began to lift the Lexus RX off the ground when she appeared. Blythe burst out of her house like someone had just robbed her. Her voice shrieked with fury. "Stop! What the hell do you think you're doing?" Reggie stayed seated in his folding chair, sipping from a water bottle like he was watching a relaxing weekend movie. The tow truck driver didn't even look up. He was busy locking the straps around the tires. Blythe marched straight toward Reggie, eyes blazing. "You called the tow truck again?" Reggie raised an eyebrow. "And you parked in my driveway again." "But I had guests. There was nowhere else to park on the street," she shouted, her hands clenched tightly. Reggie tilted his head and shrugged. That's not my problem, she hissed in frustration. You're being childish, Reggie. I told you I was going to move it. He exhaled slowly, still calm. You've said that before. And now, here we are again. Blythe's face turned a dark shade of red, as if her blood pressure had just shot through the roof. You don't know who you're messing with, she growled. I have connections. I can make your life miserable. This time Reggie laughed. Really laughed. Oh, Blythe, he said, shaking his head, I think you're the one who doesn't understand what's happening. He pointed down the street. She turned around and the Lexus was already disappearing around the corner. You should be more concerned about yourself, Reggie said as he stood up and brushed the dust from his jeans. Because this time, I'm not backing down. She stood there, trembling with rage, while Reggie walked back inside just as his family pulled up. Laughter, hugs, and cheerful greetings filled the air, sounding like a slap across the bitter loneliness on Blythe's porch across the street. You thought that was the end. It wasn't. Lee was not the type to accept defeat. If she couldn't win in silence, she would take the drama to the streets. By Monday morning, Reggie had become the villain, at least in the play that Blythe had written. A community wide email went out from the HOA board. The wording was very Blythe, passive-aggressive, and deliberately vague. The message implied that a certain resident had engaged in behavior that escalated tensions without naming anyone. But everyone knew exactly who she meant. Then came the flyers. Yes, you heard right. Flyers printed in color, laminated, and taped to every mailbox in the neighborhood. Do we want to live in a community where people tow their neighbors' cars instead of having a conversation? Reggie didn't know whether to be angry or laugh. He pulled the flyer off his own mailbox, looked it over, then shook his head. All of this? Over a parking spot? But the best part? No one believed her. The leash had gone too far for too long. People in the neighborhood were tired of her drama. The next morning, Reggie's phone lit up non-stop. Messages came in from neighbors, students, parents, even a few HOA board members who were not on Team Blythe. Hey, what's that about? You did the right thing. She's completely lost it. One message from a neighbor popped up on Reggie's screen. I saw that flyer. What is wrong with her? Everyone knows she's a nightmare. Last year she tried to fine me $200 over a wind chime. If she parks in your driveway again, I'll split the towing cost with you. Reggie laughed out loud at that one. The best part was that he didn't need to defend himself. The entire neighborhood had seen Blythe's antics for years. The unreasonable complaints, the absurd fines, the way she used the HOA like a personal weapon. And now, when she made a public fool of herself, the whole neighborhood finally started to wake up. Then came the HOA meeting. Normally, Reggie never attended those dull gatherings. But this time he sat in the front row, arms crossed, staring directly at Blythe. She didn't dare look at him. The meeting began like any other. Budget updates, landscaping reports, a reminder about placing trash bins properly. Then one board member cleared his throat. We need to address a complaint involving misuse of private property. Reggie leaned back in his chair, waiting patiently. Blythe sat up straighter, ready to play the victim. But then, this complaint is directed at Blythe Vanderholt? Reggie couldn't hide his smile. Blythe whipped her head toward the board. Excuse me? What did you just say? A few members of the board shifted uncomfortably. A woman in her 60s let out a sigh. Blythe, we've received multiple reports of you harassing neighbors and abusing your HOA position for personal matters. Blythe's mouth dropped open. That's ridiculous. I'm the one being harassed. But the accusations kept coming. Calling security for no reason, using HOA emails for personal vendettas, retaliating against neighbors, all of it documented. "You're siding with him?" she shouted. The older woman simply shook her head, gently but firmly. "Siding with the community." Blythe opened her mouth to argue, but no words came out. She looked around the room, and not a single person came to her defense. For the first time, Blythe realized she was no longer in control. And Reggie? He hadn't taken his eyes off her, watching every step of the fall of the so-called queen of the neighborhood. But Blythe still wasn't done. After years of manipulation, she couldn't handle the loss of power, so she did the most foolish thing possible. 2 days after the HOA meeting, Reggie was driving home. As he pulled into his driveway, he came to a halt. The trash bins were gone. Not tipped over, not blown away by wind, just gone. He stepped out of the car and looked around. Then he saw them. Behind Blythe's house, neatly lined up all of his trash bins. Reggie burst out laughing. She had tried emails, flyers, calling security, bogus HOA fines, and now stealing trash bins? What do you do when your neighbor spirals that far down the pit of pettiness? It was laughable. She didn't even spare the garbage. But Reggie had no intention of letting this one go. He pulled out his phone, snapped several clear photos, undeniable evidence, and marched straight toward Blythe's house. Knock, knock. No answer. Knock, knock. This time the door creaked open and Blythe appeared. There was no arrogance, no forced smile, no triumphant glare. Just a woman who looked tired, as if she already knew how this would end. Reggie held up his phone. "Care to explain why my trash bins are behind your house?" He folded her arms and looked away. "I don't know what you're talking about." Reggie gave a soft laugh and shook his head. "Blythe, I have pictures. Let's not pretend anymore." She looked at him in silence. "You've lost," Reggie said plainly. "You can't find me. You can't call security. The HOA isn't on your side. And now you're stealing trash bins like some kind of lunatic." Her eyes flickered, the final spark of a collapsing empire. But she still said nothing. Reggie stepped forward, his voice calm and low. There was no anger anymore, only truth. "You've spent months trying to make my life miserable, but now..." He pointed to the dark, silent house behind her. "It looks like the one suffering is you." Blythe pressed her lips together, swallowed hard, then said nothing, and closed the door. Reggie smiled softly. That was probably the wisest decision she had made all year. But it wasn't over. The next morning, Reggie submitted an official complaint to the HOA, this time against Blythe. He attached a detailed list of evidence. Multiple neighbor harassment reports, misuse of security calls, use of HOA communication, and now theft of personal property. By the end of the week, the HOA was forced to take action. Blythe at Vanderholt was removed from her position, her power officially gone. But the best part? From that day forward, she never parked in Reggie's driveway again. Because some people only learn their lesson when they lose everything. She never said a word to him. No more stares, no more smug smiles, no more complaints about flower pots or trash bins. She completely avoided him. And to be honest, that was the best outcome Reggie could have hoped for. For the first time in months, Reggie could drive home without feeling frustrated. No car blocking his way, no silly notes taped to his door, no ridiculous violation emails from the HOA. Just peace. But the neighborhood wasn't done talking. The story of Blythe's downfall became a local legend. The woman who once ruled the HOA like a queen had been dethroned, and suddenly those who had stayed silent began to speak up. She once fined me $75 for leaving my bike on the porch. She called security because my grandson was wearing a hoodie. I've lived here 10 years and never once saw her help anyone. And Reggie realized she had been a problem for a long time. He had just been the first to push back. And when he stood up, the entire neighborhood stood with him. But karma wasn't quite finished. A few months later, a for sale sign appeared on Blythe's lawn. She was leaving. People said she was too ashamed to stay. Others said she had made too many enemies to live peacefully anymore. Reggie didn't care what the reason was. As the moving truck rolled away, he stepped onto his porch, took a deep breath, and smiled. The battle was over, and he had won. The lesson? Some people think they can bully others forever, until they meet the one person who stands up. They believe they can be selfish, manipulative, and cruel simply because no one has ever forced them to face consequences. But sooner or later, they mess with the wrong person. And when that person stands up, the whole world watches them fall. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit subscribe, because there are plenty more must-see stories waiting just ahead.